The moment you thought you knew Meghan Markle, the polished, confident, humanitarian duchess adored by millions, was about to shatter. What if everything she carefully built, every carefully curated image of herself as a progressive, modern, compassionate woman, was suddenly thrown into doubt by photographs that no one had ever seen before? What if those photos revealed a side of her that she had spent years hiding, carefully tucked away from the public eye? Imagine the world's reaction when Ghislaine Maxwell, the infamous socialite who once orchestrated the inner circles of Jeffrey Epstein, allegedly dropped evidence that could rewrite Meghan's story entirely. Yes, the same Maxwell who stood at the center of one of the most disturbing networks of power, manipulation, and secrecy in recent history. She was now claiming that Meghan Markle had been involved, knowingly or unknowingly, in Epstein's shadowed world. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This isn't a story about speculation, gossip, or tabloids spinning rumors late at night. This is about photographs, unseen images of Meghan at Epstein-hosted social gatherings, mingling with high-profile figures, images that, if verified, could leave Meghan speechless, the public questioning, and the royal narrative destabilized. You've seen Meghan in glamorous magazines, walking hand-in-hand with Prince Harry, delivering impassioned speeches about women's empowerment, advocating for justice and equality. But what if behind closed doors, the story was very different? From the very first whispers, skeptics asked, how could someone ascend so quickly in Hollywood, then marry into the British royal family, and maintain a pristine image, all while being alleged to have connections to one of the most notorious figures of the last decade? Was it just coincidence? Or was there more, hidden layers of networking, access, and influence that have remained under the radar? This is the story that promises to peel back that veil, piece by piece. Let's rewind for a moment. Think about the world Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell created. Parties on private islands, elite gatherings filled with politicians, celebrities, and socialites, all under the veneer of sophistication and charity. This was a playground for the powerful, where secrets were currency and discretion was demanded at the highest level. Maxwell's role was not just that of a facilitator. She was the keeper of records, the archivist of influence, the person who could make or break reputations with a single photograph or an unspoken name. And it is through Maxwell's lens and the evidence she allegedly controls that Meghan Markle's narrative comes under a new and frightening scrutiny. Now, you might be asking yourself, why now? Why would Maxwell, after years of controversy, after serving her sentence and facing the world's judgment, suddenly produce these photographs? Timing is everything. Maxwell's revelations come at a moment when Meghan Markle is at the height of her influence, poised to expand her media empire, public persona, and philanthropic reach. If true, the photographs could not only devastate Meghan's image but also challenge the narrative that Harry and Meghan have carefully constructed for years. But before we dive into the allegations and the photographs themselves, let's consider the magnitude of this claim. Maxwell is not speaking hypothetically. She allegedly has concrete evidence. Photographs, records, and in the world of scandals and secrets, tangible evidence is far more potent than hearsay. These are not blurry images of distant figures at a crowded event. Reports suggest these photographs are intimate glimpses of Meghan mingling with Epstein's guests, positioned in moments that suggest familiarity, comfort, and perhaps complicity. It's a claim so explosive that it makes you question every interview Meghan has ever given, every speech about ethics and justice, and every portrayal of her as a modern, independent woman. And yet, this story is more than just Meghan. It's about the intricate web of power, manipulation, and secrecy that Maxwell and Epstein cultivated over decades. It's about the subtle ways in which influence operates, often invisibly, shaping careers, reputations, and alliances. When you start to connect the dots, the patterns emerge. Social circles intersecting with power, mentorships masked as opportunity, and access disguised as networking. It is in this context that Meghan's alleged involvement takes on a new, chilling dimension. But let's not jump ahead too quickly. To fully understand the gravity, we must walk through the circumstances surrounding Meghan's rise, Maxwell's history, and Epstein's world. Meghan arrived in Hollywood with ambition and talent. She navigated the treacherous waters of celebrity culture, managing to secure roles, connections, and opportunities that propelled her forward at a remarkable pace. She cultivated an image of integrity, charm, and social consciousness. Her relationship with Prince Harry elevated her to global prominence, further insulating her from criticism and offering her a platform unmatched by nearly anyone in her peer group. Yet behind that public image, some claim, were corridors and gatherings of influence where power and discretion were the ultimate currency. The private parties hosted by Epstein were notorious for their exclusivity and for the indiscretions of their attendees. Maxwell, as the orchestrator of these events, was the gatekeeper, carefully curating who was allowed access and who was not. According to reports, the photographs she allegedly holds do not just show Meghan in attendance. They capture her in positions that suggest she was fully integrated into these elite social networks. This is where the tension lies. How do these alleged images reconcile with the public persona Meghan has maintained for years? Consider the emotional implications. For Meghan, the revelation of such photographs, if accurate, would be devastating. The careful balance of her life, the image of a compassionate humanitarian, a devoted wife, a voice for women, could crumble under the scrutiny of visual evidence contradicting her carefully maintained narrative. For the public, the questions are equally profound. How much of what we've been told about Meghan is true? What does it mean for her legacy, her influence, and her relationship with the royal family? And for those invested in the monarchy, what ripple effects could this have on the institution itself? As we prepare to explore this story, it's essential to remember that this is a tale of secrets, revelations, and power. It is a story that interweaves the private and the public, the personal and the political, the seen and the unseen. We will dive deep into Maxwell's alleged evidence, analyze the photographs, and consider the context in which Meghan's presence at these events might have occurred. We will explore why such evidence, if true, could leave Meghan speechless, and why the implications could reach far beyond her personal reputation. And yet, even as we begin, the most pressing question remains unanswered. Why would Maxwell, a woman who has faced the world's judgment and legal consequences, choose now to expose such information? Is it revenge, leverage, a bid for relevance, or something else entirely? The motives are as murky as the photographs themselves, and understanding them is key to unraveling the full story. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. You might be asking yourself, how could Meghan Markle, a figure whose every move is scrutinized under the global spotlight, have possibly crossed paths with one of the most notorious social networks in recent history? How could someone so carefully curated in the public eye appear in spaces so dark, so secretive, and so laden with controversy? The answer, according to the explosive claims coming from Ghislaine Maxwell, lies in a set of photographs that have never been made public. Images that allegedly place Meghan at Epstein-hosted gatherings, side by side with high-profile guests, rubbing shoulders with power, influence, and secrecy itself. Let's start at the beginning. Imagine a young Meghan Markle, ambitious and poised, navigating Hollywood's elite circles. She was not just an actress, not merely a rising star on a hit television show. She was a strategist, a woman aware of how influence operates in the world of glitz, glamour, and power. It's easy to underestimate the role of networking in Hollywood, but the right connections, the right introductions, could change everything. And this is where Maxwell's alleged photographs enter the story. These images reportedly show Meghan in moments of ease, mingling effortlessly with figures whose influence reaches far beyond entertainment. At first glance, they are party photos, glamorous, social, celebratory. But look closer. Consider the company she kept. Every gesture, every smile, every pose tells a story about presence, acceptance, and participation in a world most of us will never see. Some might argue that photographs at parties do not automatically imply wrongdoing. And that's true. There is a fine line between presence and participation, between social access and complicity. But here's the twist. These weren't just ordinary Hollywood parties. They were gatherings orchestrated by Jeffrey Epstein and facilitated by Ghislaine Maxwell, events that have since been tied to some of the most disturbing allegations of abuse, manipulation, and exploitation in recent memory. For Meghan to appear at such events, knowingly or unknowingly, raises questions that extend far beyond celebrity gossip. It touches on power, morality, and the stark realities of elite social circles where influence often masks unethical behavior. The emotional stakes are staggering. For Meghan Markle, this revelation, if validated, could unravel the carefully maintained narrative of her public persona. Every charitable speech, every interview highlighting her humanitarian work, suddenly becomes reframed under a different light. And for Prince Harry, the implications are equally intense. He has built a public life and identity in opposition to secrecy and corruption, positioning himself as a champion of transparency and integrity. How would he reconcile his personal beliefs with the possibility that someone he deeply trusts, someone he loves, may have moved in circles he has publicly condemned? The timing of Maxwell's alleged evidence could not be more dramatic. Meghan's influence is at an all-time high, from media ventures to social initiatives, from charitable engagements to high-profile public appearances. She has become a symbol of modern royalty, media-savvy activism, and global influence. To confront allegations tying her to Epstein's inner circle at this moment creates a tension that the world cannot ignore. It is a collision between past associations and present influence, between private actions and public persona. The photographs reportedly depict her in moments of casual familiarity with Epstein's guests, gestures that, to a trained eye, suggest comfort, ease, and a level of integration into a network few outsiders could penetrate. But let's pause for a moment. We have to consider the credibility of these claims. Ghislaine Maxwell herself is a figure shrouded in controversy. Convicted, vilified, and yet still commanding attention from the world's media, Maxwell holds a unique position. She was both orchestrator and participant, a woman who knew the inner workings of Epstein's world intimately. When she speaks, when she allegedly produces photographs, the weight of her words is amplified by the undeniable fact that she lived at the center of it all. Maxwell's motives may be questioned: revenge, leverage, or simply a bid to reclaim relevance. But the core of her evidence, these photographs, demands scrutiny. Were they produced in court, leaked to the media, or revealed in private negotiations? The ambiguity only adds to the tension, the suspense, the sense that we are witnessing a narrative in real time, one that could upend perceptions and reputations overnight. Now, imagine the context of these gatherings. Epstein's events were carefully curated. Not everyone was invited. Not every presence was casual. Invitations were selective, attendance was monitored, and the optics of every photograph mattered. To appear in such settings implies a degree of acceptance, a tacit acknowledgement of the rules and social codes of this hidden world. Meghan, by being photographed in these spaces, was, intentionally or not, participating in a narrative that intertwined glamour with shadows, charm with manipulation, and visibility with hidden power dynamics. And yet, contradictions emerge. Meghan Markle has publicly portrayed herself as a champion of ethics, a woman committed to justice, to fairness, to empowering others. How does this reconcile with evidence placing her in spaces associated with coercion, exploitation, and secrecy? This tension between public image and alleged private associations is precisely what makes Maxwell's claims so electrifying. It is the collision of narrative and evidence, persona and proof, perception and reality. And it forces the audience, us, the viewers, the consumers of media, to confront the complexity of influence, ambition, and morality. Consider the psychology of these interactions. Being in the presence of power can be intoxicating. The allure of exclusivity, the magnetic pull of social ascent, the opportunity to network with the world's elite. These forces can shape decisions, behaviors, and allegiances. It's possible, as some speculate, that Meghan's attendance was strategic, a calculated move to solidify her network, her career, and eventually her public profile. Or perhaps it was casual, innocent even, an actress mingling at high society events without a full understanding of the web around her. The photographs alone cannot answer that question. They merely provoke it. And it is in the provocation, in the unanswered questions, that Maxwell's alleged evidence wields its power. Let's not overlook the emotional stakes for the audience. Many people admire Meghan Markle. They see her as relatable, as a woman breaking barriers, as a figure who has navigated adversity with grace. To confront allegations linking her to Epstein's network creates a cognitive dissonance that is difficult to reconcile. Are we witnessing the unmasking of a carefully curated persona? Or are we glimpsing a reality that is far more nuanced, where ambition, association, and circumstance intersect in ways that defy easy moral judgment? And then there's the public reaction to consider. Social media would erupt. Headlines would dominate the news cycle. Pundits, commentators, and influencers would weigh in with analysis, speculation, and outrage. Public trust in Meghan Markle, and by extension the royal family, could be tested in unprecedented ways. Every speech she gives, every public appearance she makes, would be scrutinized through the lens of these allegations. Even if the photographs are later contextualized, the initial shockwave could have lasting repercussions on her public image, her influence, and her legacy. But the most chilling aspect of all, according to reports, Maxwell did not release all the evidence at once. Only select images were shared, enough to ignite curiosity and fear, but leaving the audience and Meghan alike guessing about what else might exist. If these photographs exist, and if Maxwell holds more, the story is far from over. The tension escalates because no one knows the full scope. No one knows the depth of Meghan's alleged entanglement with Epstein's world. And that uncertainty, that suspense, is what grips the audience and refuses to let go. So here we are, standing at the precipice of revelation. Photographs, unseen by the public, allegedly showing Meghan at Epstein-hosted gatherings, mingling with the powerful and the infamous. A figure once considered untouchable, now facing scrutiny not just from the press, but from the very world she sought to influence. Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman whose name alone evokes fear, fascination, and moral complexity, holding pieces of evidence that could unravel a narrative built over decades. And the question that lingers, haunting and insistent: what will Meghan do when confronted with the full truth? How will she respond when the private and the public collide in ways that cannot be ignored? But just when you think the story has reached its peak, there's a twist, an element that no one expected. Because these photographs, these alleged snapshots of Meghan at Epstein's parties, were not merely passive images. They contained subtle details, cues, and interactions that suggested far more than mere attendance. Smiles shared with high-profile guests, gestures that implied familiarity, the positioning of Meghan in rooms where power brokers gathered. The images reportedly spoke volumes, and not in the way Meghan's public image would allow. And just as the tension reached a fever pitch, a new revelation emerged. Maxwell claimed there were even more photographs, hidden, undiscovered, images that had never seen the light of day. These photographs were said to include moments so incriminating, so intimately revealing, that they had the potential to redefine public understanding of Meghan Markle and of the very network she allegedly moved within. But what exactly these photographs showed, and what Maxwell's ultimate goal might be, remained shrouded in mystery. But what exactly could those hidden photographs show? What secrets could be buried in frames, in shadows, in moments captured and preserved before the world ever knew their significance? Imagine the tension, the kind of tension that tightens in your chest when a rumor begins to feel real, when the unseen becomes suddenly, terrifyingly tangible. Maxwell claimed these images were not random snapshots. They were curated, selected, revealing, evidence that painted a picture of Meghan Markle in circles most of the world could only guess existed. And if true, they posed questions that no one in the royal orbit, or Hollywood, for that matter, was prepared to answer. Think about the stakes. Meghan Markle has spent years cultivating her image, a modern, independent woman, a philanthropist, a figure bridging worlds. The narrative was clear, controlled, deliberate. But now, allegedly, there existed photographic proof that challenged that entire storyline. Did these images depict her as a willing participant? Was she complicit, knowingly engaging in the social web that Epstein and Maxwell orchestrated? Or were these photographs snapshots of a young actress navigating spaces that, at the time, she didn't fully understand? A girl mingling in high society, oblivious to the darker undertones of her surroundings? Every expert, every commentator, every observer would now have to grapple with these questions. Because photographs are not just images, they are symbols, statements frozen in time. And when those symbols intersect with allegations of criminal networks, exploitation, and manipulation, the impact is magnified. They carry weight. They provoke doubt. They ignite curiosity. And they demand answers. Let's step back for a moment and consider the environment in which these photographs were allegedly taken. Epstein's parties were infamous for their exclusivity. They were gatherings that blended opulence with opportunity, glamour with secrecy. You had to be invited, or at least have the right connections, to even cross the threshold. Cameras, yes, were present, but not all images were meant to surface publicly. Every photograph taken at these gatherings was potential. But here's where it gets more tangled. Allegedly, these photographs didn't just show Meghan standing in the background, smiling politely. Reports suggest she was photographed in moments of engagement. Handshakes, private conversations, gestures indicating familiarity, ease, and acceptance within the inner circle. How do we interpret that? Does familiarity equal complicity? Or does it simply indicate a person navigating a world of power where every smile, every nod, every interaction is part performance, part survival? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the exact questions that would consume Meghan Markle, her advisors, and anyone who truly understands the gravity of Maxwell's claims. The emotional tension here is palpable. For Meghan Markle, every photo released could feel like a confrontation, a public unmasking of choices or associations she may have thought irrelevant or harmless. And for those who admire her, the images could create a dissonance, a struggle between what is believed about her and what is suddenly suggested. Social media speculation would explode, traditional media would dissect every detail, and public opinion would hang in the balance, poised to tilt either way with every new revelation. And then consider the timing. Why now? Maxwell's release of these photographs, if verified, would be strategic, meticulous even. Timing is everything in stories of scandal. Dropping such claims at a moment when Meghan's influence is at its peak, when her media ventures, public engagements, and social advocacy are most visible, ensures maximum impact. It's a reminder that power is fragile, that public perception is manipulable, and that the past, no matter how well managed, has a way of catching up. Now, let's explore the psychological dimensions of this alleged evidence. Being in Epstein's orbit, even peripherally, is a loaded experience. Imagine attending a party, being surrounded by influential figures, feeling the gravity of the room, the weight of opportunity, the allure of connections that could change a career. How does one navigate that? Does one recognize the danger? Or is the pull of potential advancement too strong to resist, blinding the eyes to the moral implications? And if Meghan was present, knowingly or unknowingly, does that make her a participant or simply a witness to a world that few can understand? Some analysts have suggested that Meghan's presence in these photographs could be explained by the culture of Hollywood networking. After all, many rising stars find themselves in rooms they don't fully comprehend, mingling with power brokers whose reputations are murky at best. But this is where Maxwell's alleged evidence complicates things. Reports claim that the photographs are not of casual gatherings. They are images that suggest integration into a system, a network that functioned with rules and hierarchies known only to insiders. To appear comfortable, to engage freely, implies more than mere attendance. It implies a level of acceptance, perhaps even belonging. And yet, contradictions abound. Meghan Markle has publicly positioned herself as a moral compass, advocating for human rights, equality, and transparency. How does this align with photographic evidence placing her near individuals whose actions are now criminally condemned, whose reputations are tainted, whose legacies are irreparably stained? The cognitive dissonance is striking. It is precisely the tension between public narrative and alleged private associations that makes Maxwell's claims so explosive, so compelling, and so terrifying. We also have to consider the ripple effect. If these photographs exist, and if more are yet to emerge, they do not just affect Meghan Markle. They affect the royal family, Prince Harry, public trust in celebrities, and the perception of influence in elite networks. The mere suggestion of association with Epstein's inner circle casts shadows that reach far beyond the images themselves, and the audience is left grappling with questions of morality, judgment, and the limits of accountability. But here's the element that escalates the stakes even further. According to reports, Maxwell's alleged photographs contain not just Meghan in social settings. but contextual cues that suggested an intimate awareness of the inner workings of these gatherings. Small gestures, subtle expressions, the way she was positioned in photographs relative to others. These details, while easily overlooked by the untrained eye, have been interpreted by experts as signals of comfort, familiarity, and knowledge. This is what makes the evidence allegedly so damning. It is not just a snapshot. It is a narrative encoded in imagery, a story told without words. And as if that weren't enough, rumors began circulating that Maxwell might hold even more than photographs. Video footage, private correspondences, invitations, items that could corroborate, contextualize, or completely redefine the meaning of the images already released. The scope of potential evidence hinted at a narrative far deeper and more complex than anyone could have anticipated. It was the kind of revelation that makes the public hold its breath, that turns ordinary reporting into a global spectacle, that forces everyone to question what they know about influence, ambition, and power. At this point, one question dominates all others. How will Meghan respond? Will she deny, explain, contextualize, or retreat from the public eye? The tension is palpable because the images, if authentic, are not easily dismissed. They are visual records of moments in time that speak louder than statements, interviews, or press releases ever could. They force engagement, confrontation, and reckoning on a scale few public figures have ever faced. And then there's the human element, the fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty. For Meghan, every photo released is a potential minefield, every rumor a threat to personal and professional life. For the public, these images provoke fascination, outrage, and speculation. And for Maxwell, the photographs are both weapon and shield, evidence and leverage, narrative and counter-narrative, all wrapped in secrecy and ambiguity. But just when you think the story has reached its peak tension, there's an even darker twist. Sources suggest that among the allegedly released images, there were moments so subtle, so fleeting, that their significance might be missed by casual observers, but could be devastating when examined by those who know what to look for. A hand on a shoulder, a glance exchanged, a body positioned in a certain way. These were reportedly cues, indicators of a world within a world, of dynamics that went far beyond mere social interaction. And if these photographs are just the beginning, what else could Maxwell be holding? And that's where we leave Chapter 2, at the edge of revelation, staring into a void of unanswered questions. Because the story is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more astonishing disclosures that could redefine everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the shadowed corridors of influence that connect them. But what did it really feel like for Meghan Markle when the first whispers of these photographs reached her? Imagine the private moments of panic, the silent shock that hits when a past you thought contained is suddenly illuminated under an unforgiving spotlight. For someone who has spent years crafting a public persona of control, grace, and advocacy, the alleged existence of these images would feel like a sudden earthquake, shaking every carefully constructed foundation. What's truly fascinating here is the human psychology at play. We are drawn to secrets. We are mesmerized by the hidden lives of the powerful. And when the hidden life suggests moral ambiguity, when it hints at alliances with controversial figures like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, the fascination turns to obsession. How could someone so beloved, so visible, be tied to spaces that brimmed with darkness? The contradiction is irresistible. The tension is palpable. Sources allege that the first image that circulated within Maxwell's circle showed Meghan at a private gathering in Manhattan, a room filled with influential, wealthy, and notorious figures. She was laughing, seemingly at ease, a glass in her hand. On the surface, nothing seemed out of place. But look closer. Notice the people around her, their proximity, their gestures. Was she a mere guest? Or had she been welcomed into a circle where access was rare, where discretion was paramount, and where the stakes were high? This raises the inevitable question. Did Meghan know what she was stepping into? Was she aware of the darker undertones, the whispered stories that permeated the circles of Epstein's network? Or was she, like many young actors navigating Hollywood's labyrinth of opportunity and power, blinded by ambition, charm, and the allure of connection? This tension, between innocence and complicity, is what makes these alleged photographs so potent. They are not just images. They are provocations, questioning the narrative of who Meghan Markle is versus who she might have been in moments unseen by the public eye. The fallout from such revelations is multilayered. Public perception is fragile, easily swayed by imagery, rumors, and insinuations. Social media would erupt. Analysts would dissect every frame, magnify every detail, and speculate endlessly. Every gesture, every look, every association would be scrutinized, judged, and potentially weaponized. And for Meghan Markle, this would be a moment of reckoning, a test of resilience, narrative control, and crisis management. But here's where it gets even more intricate. Allegedly, some of the photographs Maxwell revealed were not just of Meghan at parties. They were photographs showing her in conversation with individuals whose reputations are now tarnished, individuals whose activities have been the subject of federal investigations, and individuals whose mere presence in these images could raise serious questions about judgment and proximity. Was Meghan simply navigating a social environment, or was she being positioned, knowingly or unknowingly, in ways that aligned her with a network whose shadow looms large over global headlines? Consider this storytelling dimension. Every photograph tells a story, but context is everything. A smile can signify ease, complicity, or even strategic performance. A handshake can be innocent or loaded with meaning. A glance can be fleeting or revealing. Allegedly, Maxwell's images are layered with these subtleties, moments that require interpretation, insight, and, crucially, perspective. And therein lies the power of this alleged evidence. It doesn't shout conclusions. It invites them. It demands that the viewer engage, speculate, and question. There is also the dimension of media strategy. Why release these photographs now? Timing in high-profile revelations is everything. Maxwell's alleged decision to reveal these images during a period when Meghan's public profile is especially prominent ensures maximum impact. Every headline, every segment, every social media thread becomes a conduit for the narrative. It is the calculated intersection of scandal, timing, and public curiosity, and it forces Meghan to respond, or risk being defined solely by the emerging narrative. Now let's talk about credibility. Maxwell herself carries a complicated reputation. Convicted of aiding and abetting Epstein, she is both a figure of public fascination and caution. Anything she presents is viewed through the lens of her criminal background, her alliances, and her motivations. Skeptics would question the authenticity of the photographs. They would ask, is this fabrication, exaggeration, or manipulation? And yet, the very act of presenting these images, whether fully verified or partially contextualized, creates an indelible ripple, a story that cannot easily be retracted once released into the public domain. Emotionally, imagine being Meghan Markle at this point. Every public event, every interview, every media appearance becomes a minefield. Every interaction could be scrutinized for clues, every word potentially dissected. The psychological weight of knowing someone holds images that could shift public perception, images that could challenge credibility, reshape narrative, and ignite controversy, is immense. And the stakes are not only personal. They are professional, social, and potentially legal. Allegedly, Maxwell's photographs include scenes from gatherings where Epstein's network intertwined with global elites, politicians, financiers, celebrities, and socialites. Each frame is a nexus of influence, power, and implication. And in this intricate web, Meghan Markle's placement becomes significant. Was she an observer, a participant, or something in between? Did she recognize the significance of these interactions, or were they merely part of navigating a world she was only beginning to understand? Some reports suggest that one of the more disturbing elements of the images is Meghan's apparent comfort in these spaces. Critics argue that familiarity implies knowledge, knowledge implies consent, and consent implies complicity. Supporters counter that public figures often find themselves photographed in environments they do not fully comprehend, that social interaction does not equate to moral alignment. The debate, therefore, is fierce, polarized, and unresolved. And that tension is exactly what Maxwell's alleged photographs exploit. But the narrative deepens further. Sources indicate that Maxwell might have additional documentation beyond photographs, emails, invitations, perhaps even direct correspondences, that could frame these images in a broader context. If true, this evidence could either exonerate, implicate, or redefine Meghan's perceived involvement. Every layer uncovered raises new questions, each more provocative than the last. And the public, hungry for clarity, is left waiting, speculating, and projecting their interpretations onto a narrative that remains tantalizingly incomplete. And then there is the element of secrecy. Epstein's gatherings were notorious for their clandestine nature. They were spaces where privacy was paramount, where discretion was valued, and where the unobserved could become entangled in stories that would later make headlines. Allegedly, these photographs capture not only the social veneer, but also the undercurrents, the glances, the positioning, the subtleties of interaction that reveal far more than casual presence. This duality, the surface glamour and the hidden implication, is what makes these images allegedly so compelling, so scandalous, and so potentially devastating. The emotional stakes escalate further when you consider the ripple effect on Meghan's personal relationships. For Prince Harry, for her inner circle, for family members, the alleged evidence is not abstract. It is immediate, tangible, and potentially damaging. How do you protect loved ones when the past surfaces in a form so public, so undeniable, and so open to interpretation? The tension is suffocating, the uncertainty relentless, and the consequences far-reaching. And if you think that's the height of tension, consider the broader cultural implications. The images allegedly situate Meghan Markle at the intersection of Hollywood, royalty, and global influence networks. They force the public to confront uncomfortable questions about access, power, privilege, and morality. They challenge perceptions of celebrity innocence, and they raise larger questions about the structures that allow such interactions to exist without scrutiny until decades later. But perhaps the most compelling question remains: what is Maxwell's ultimate goal? Is this a strategic revelation to assert power, to negotiate leverage, or to rewrite historical narratives? Or is it simply the unveiling of truth, however inconvenient or shocking it might be? And in either case, how does Meghan Markle navigate the storm that has now begun? A storm fueled by images, speculation, and the relentless machinery of public curiosity? At this point, the story hangs in delicate balance. Alleged photographs exist, the implications are immense, and the questions multiply with every passing day. Meghan's next moves, her responses, her decisions, all are pivotal. And the audience is left on edge, waiting for the next development, the next reveal, the next twist that could redefine everything we think we know. Because even as Maxwell's photographs circulate, hinting at hidden truths and untold stories, one thing is certain. The next chapter promises revelations that could shatter reputations, ignite controversy, and push the boundaries of public perception even further. And no one, not Meghan, not Harry, not the public, is prepared for what comes next. What would you do if you discovered that your past was not just a memory, but a weapon? Imagine the panic, the disbelief, the overwhelming realization that moments you thought were private are now subject to intense scrutiny. For Meghan Markle, this is no hypothetical scenario, it is reality. The alleged release of photographs by Maxwell is just the beginning. The ripple effect is already moving through every layer of her life, personal, professional, and public. At this stage, the narrative pivots. Allegedly, certain images show Meghan not just in social settings, but in private conversations with individuals whose backgrounds are now central to ongoing investigations. One photograph reportedly captures her speaking quietly with someone whose involvement in financial and social manipulations has been the subject of intense media coverage. Every viewer interprets the expression differently. Some see concern, others see complicity. And this ambiguity fuels speculation. But here's the nuance most people overlook. Meghan Markle has always been adept at managing perception. Her public persona is carefully curated, her interviews meticulously scripted, and her appearances strategically timed. Yet the past, frozen in time, does not adhere to scripts. It does not allow for edits, disclaimers, or clarifications. Once an image is out, it takes on a life of its own. It becomes a narrative that exists independently of intention or context. Allegedly, One of the most controversial images portrays Meghan at a private gathering where Epstein and Maxwell's influence extended beyond mere socializing. The room was reportedly filled with political strategists, financial power players, and socialites whose actions were later revealed to have global implications. Observers argue that Meghan's presence there, casual as it may have appeared, raises questions about her awareness and judgment. Was she an innocent participant, or did she navigate these spaces with full knowledge of their underlying dynamics? Emotional tension escalates when we consider how Meghan herself might have perceived these events. A young actress navigating Hollywood's complex ecosystem often encounters situations where opportunity and risk are intertwined. Invitations to exclusive gatherings, introductions to influential figures, and access to high-stakes networks are often accompanied by unspoken expectations. Did Meghan understand the implications of her attendance at these events? Was she ever briefed on the gravity of the company she was keeping? Or was she, like many, caught in a web that she did not fully comprehend until the evidence surfaced decades later? What makes this situation even more compelling is the alleged authenticity of the photographs. Maxwell, convicted of crimes related to Epstein's activities, is a polarizing figure. Her credibility is simultaneously undermined by her past and amplified by her access. Skeptic. What made the leaks particularly devastating was not just their content, but their timing. They appeared over the course of days, strategically spaced to maintain public attention, to prevent the story from fading into background noise. It was as if someone had designed a drip feed, a slow but steady unveiling that ensured maximum engagement and maximum tension. Social media algorithms amplified it, headlines screamed it, and soon the world was obsessed with every detail. But the emotional impact wasn't limited to the public. Within the palace, chaos ensued. Advisors and aides scrambled to identify the source, only to discover that the leaks were coming from multiple, unexpected channels. Some suspected internal dissent, palace staff disillusioned or seeking leverage. Others feared external manipulation, journalists, hackers, or even individuals working directly with Meghan to shape the narrative. The uncertainty bred paranoia. No meeting felt safe. No conversation could be considered private. Every whisper could be recorded, every gesture scrutinized. Prince Harry's reaction was particularly intense. Friends reported that he felt both betrayed and vindicated. On one hand, he was furious that intimate family details had been made public. On the other, he felt a grim sense of relief, because some of the leaks corroborated suspicions he had quietly harbored for years. The sense of betrayal was personal, emotional, and all-consuming. Imagine feeling that your own family had maintained a narrative at your expense, that appearances of care, loyalty, and affection had been carefully choreographed for public consumption. It's a wound that cuts deeper than any public scandal. William, on the other hand, faced a balancing act that tested both his intellect and his emotional resilience. He had to navigate loyalty to his father, the need to protect the family's legacy, and the growing public perception that the monarchy was crumbling from within. Every decision became a calculated risk. Public statements were drafted, revised, and reconsidered. Appearances were rescheduled. The optics of every gesture mattered more than ever, because one misstep could amplify the perception of instability and weaken centuries of institutional authority. Camilla, ever the strategist, recognized the opportunity in the chaos. While the leaks painted her husband in moments of vulnerability, they also exposed the vulnerabilities of others. She began to subtly position herself, ensuring that while the family scrambled, she maintained control over messaging, appearances, and perception. Some insiders suggested that she quietly communicated with media contacts, preparing preemptive narratives that would soften her image and cast her in a stabilizing light. And, as usual, took a methodical approach. She insisted on documenting everything, verifying the leaks, and mapping out their potential consequences. Her team worked tirelessly to cross-reference the documents and footage with existing records, looking for inconsistencies, potential misinterpretations, and threats to the family's reputation. Yet even with her meticulous attention, the emotional toll was apparent. Colleagues noticed dark circles under her eyes, moments of frustration, and a rare vulnerability when she believed no one was watching. The realization was stark. No amount of preparation could fully insulate the family from the fallout. And then came the public reaction. Headlines screamed, social media exploded, and debates raged online. Pundits, commentators, and citizens alike dissected every leaked detail, theorizing motives, predicting consequences, and questioning the integrity of the monarchy itself. Hashtags trended globally, discussions spilled into everyday conversation, and even those previously indifferent to royal affairs suddenly felt compelled to weigh in. It was a frenzy, a tidal wave of scrutiny that even the most seasoned palace advisors could not have anticipated. Yet, despite the frenzy, there was an underlying sense of narrative control from Meghan's camp. While the leaks seemed chaotic, they were released in a manner that suggested strategy, forethought, and timing. Friends of Meghan hinted that the leaks were designed not just to inform, but to destabilize, to provoke reactions, and to shift the balance of power within the royal family. Each release seemed calculated to force responses, create tension, and expose divisions. As the palace worked to respond, they encountered a frustrating reality. Any public statement risked confirming details inadvertently, creating new waves of scrutiny. Silence, on the other hand, invited speculation, assumptions, and accusations. It was a lose-lose scenario, one in which every action carried risk and every inaction carried consequence. Inside the family, the emotional strain was tangible. Harry reportedly confided in close friends that he felt trapped between anger and disbelief. William expressed frustration with the seemingly endless chain reaction of events. And, ever disciplined, worried about the long-term impact on the monarchy. Charles, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile personal shame with public duty. And Camilla, for all her strategy, could not completely shield herself from the emotional and reputational impact. But the leaks did more than just expose facts. They shifted the narrative itself. Suddenly, the public began to question not just individual actions, but the very structure, decisions, and priorities of the royal family. Everything once perceived as stable, traditional, and untouchable was now subject to debate, speculation, and analysis. The monarchy, for the first time in decades, appeared vulnerable, human, and undeniably flawed. The palace's internal response, meanwhile, became a story in itself. Meetings extended late into the night. Security was heightened, surveillance tightened, and trusted aides were monitored. Strategies were drafted, revised, and sometimes abandoned in frustration. And amidst it all, one overarching question remained. Could the family contain the damage, or was this only the beginning of a global revelation that would shake centuries of tradition? Because the truth was inescapable, these leaks weren't random. They weren't careless. They were designed, executed, and timed for maximum effect. And as the world absorbed each new revelation, the royal family had to confront a reality they had long avoided. Control was an illusion, and the next move could change everything, forever. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have your entire world collapse in a matter of hours? To feel the ground beneath you fracture, not from an earthquake, not from a natural disaster, but from the revelations of those you trusted most? This was the moment Prince Harry had been quietly bracing for his entire life, and yet nothing could have prepared him for the emotional storm that was about to hit. It started with the leaks. At first, Harry tried to brush them off, telling himself this was just the predictable chaos of media frenzy. Royals always face rumors, after all. Scandals come and go. Headlines scream, cameras flash, and the world moves on. But these leaks were different. They weren't anonymous whispers or misquoted statements. They were intimate, precise, and deeply personal. They exposed decisions, conversations, and betrayals that hit closer than the public eye could ever imagine. One document, in particular, tore through his composure like a knife. It outlined directives from Charles himself. Internal instructions that subtly, almost imperceptibly, undermined Harry. The memo detailed expectations, appearances, and roles, but buried within it were lines that read more like judgments, comments on his unsuitability, reminders of his secondary status, and subtle assertions that his contributions were less valued than those of others. It wasn't overt. It wasn't malicious in tone, but the implications were devastating. To anyone else, these might have seemed like bureaucratic minutiae. To Harry, they confirmed every fear he had buried since childhood. And then there were the videos. Harry watched, frozen, as private conversations he thought were safe were broadcast to the world. Moments of vulnerability, private frustrations, and even jokes were now dissected, replayed, and mocked. He saw himself in a way he had never imagined, exposed, scrutinized, and powerless. Friends reported that he felt stripped of his dignity. Every line spoken, every expression made, suddenly seemed to confirm that his life had been a carefully orchestrated performance, and he was never in control of the script. The emotional weight of these revelations was crushing. Imagine the combination of betrayal, humiliation, and helplessness, magnified by global attention. Harry was forced to confront a painful reality. The family he loved, the institution he respected, and the legacy he cherished were all intertwined in secrets that now lay bare. The very people who should have been allies, confidants, and protectors were revealed to be orchestrators of narratives that marginalized him. It wasn't just the leaks themselves, it was what they revealed about patterns, history, and repeated behaviors. Old letters surfaced, private correspondences between Charles and advisors discussing Harry in terms that were cold, calculating, and strategic. Decisions that once seemed routine. Placement of security, scheduling of appearances, delegation of responsibilities were revealed as part of a meticulous design that subtly, yet consistently, minimized Harry's influence. Every detail that had once seemed trivial now screamed of intentional design. Harry's breaking point came quietly, in a moment alone. He retreated to a secluded wing of his residence, where he could escape the relentless scrutiny of staff, media, and even family. The room was silent. No flashing cameras. No prying eyes. Just the weight of truth pressing down, and a silence that magnified every emotion. He replayed conversations in his mind, analyzed encounters, and measured the impact of each revelation. Anger, betrayal, disbelief, and beneath it all, a raw, unfiltered grief that consumed him. Friends described him during this period as distant, volatile, and haunted. There were moments of rage, where he would throw objects in frustration, pacing the room in a storm of emotion. Other times, he would collapse into despair, tears flowing unchecked, grief spilling over the barriers he had spent decades erecting. The public would never see these moments. The cameras were kept at bay, but the emotional toll was immense, and the isolation he felt compounded it. Yet, even amidst the chaos, Harry was not passive. He began to strategize, to consider options, and to contemplate responses that could reclaim agency. Letters were drafted, carefully worded messages intended for private delivery, not public consumption. Conversations with close confidants became meticulous planning sessions. Every potential move, every possible reaction, was weighed against the risks and benefits. He was determined not to let the leaks define him or dictate his next steps. But even in strategy, there was vulnerability. Each decision carried emotional risk, a chance to be further exposed, misunderstood, or betrayed. Friends observed that he oscillated between moments of clarity and episodes of intense doubt. How could he trust anyone? Could he rely on his own judgment after so many years of subtle manipulation? And in the background, the media buzzed relentlessly, interpreting every known fact, every speculation, and every rumor as confirmation of scandal. The psychological strain was compounded by the family dynamics that had long been complicated. William, Charles, Camilla, and each had their own perspectives, agendas, and strategies. Interactions with them were fraught with tension, careful observation, and unspoken assumptions. One simple conversation could trigger multiple layers of calculation, each word weighed for its implication, each gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. Harry had to navigate this minefield while grappling with the personal implications of the leaks. And then came the confrontation. One evening, after a series of particularly inflammatory leaks, Harry confronted Charles directly. The room was charged with tension, the air thick with suppressed emotions. What was said in that conversation is largely unknown to the public, but sources suggest it was a combination of accusation, inquiry, and raw, unfiltered emotion. Harry demanded answers. He needed clarity, resolution, and acknowledgement of the pain he had endured. But what he received in return was a mixture of evasion, justification, and, most devastatingly, confirmation that much of what he had feared was true. It was in that moment, according to insiders, that Harry's composure finally fractured. The prince, who had often been characterized as diplomatic, reserved, and measured, allowed himself to be fully human. The anger, grief, and betrayal that had been simmering under the surface erupted. Words were spoken that would have shocked anyone who thought of Harry as controlled or reserved. The intensity of his emotions, the sheer weight of his humanity, left those present in stunned silence. This breaking point, however, was not merely personal. It had consequences that rippled throughout the palace and beyond. Decisions made in the heat of emotional turmoil influenced subsequent interactions, strategy, and even public perception. The leaks, the betrayal, and the emotional confrontation all converged to create a moment of reckoning. Harry's response would define not only his relationship with the family, but also his role in the narrative that the world was now watching unfold. But in the middle of this emotional storm, another revelation surfaced, a detail so unexpected, so shocking, that it threatened to redefine everything Harry thought he knew. It wasn't a leak, a document, or a video. It was a conversation, whispered in confidence, that connected dots no one else had noticed. It suggested that the intricacies of betrayal, secrecy, and manipulation extended even further than anyone could imagine. The emotional weight of this new information added another layer of complexity to Harry's breaking point. He was faced with impossible choices: confront the truth and risk further personal devastation, or step back and protect himself from additional pain. Each option carried profound consequences, not just for him, but for the family, the monarchy, and the public narrative that was rapidly forming. And as he grappled with these choices, Harry realized one undeniable truth. The leaks had done more than expose secrets. They had forced him into a confrontation with reality, a confrontation with betrayal, and ultimately, a confrontation with himself. What came next was uncertain, dangerous, and inevitable. Because in the palace, as in life, breaking points are rarely private for long. Someone was always watching, always listening, and always ready to capitalize on vulnerability. And as Harry stood on the edge of this personal and public precipice, one question lingered in the air. Would he rise from the chaos stronger, or would the revelations shatter him completely? Have you ever held a letter in your hands that promised to change everything you thought you knew about your life? One that could shatter trust, rewrite history, and leave you questioning every relationship you had ever counted on? For Prince Harry, that moment had arrived, and it came wrapped in a single, unassuming envelope. Creased at the edges, the kind of envelope that seemed almost too ordinary to contain extraordinary secrets. The letter arrived in the quiet of the evening, slipped under the door of his private study. No announcement, no fanfare, no courier with a note. Just a solitary envelope, bearing the insignia of the royal household but unmistakably unsigned. Harry stared at it for what felt like an eternity, unsure whether to open it, uncertain if he was ready for whatever truths it might reveal. His heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at him to destroy it, to avoid whatever poison it contained. But curiosity, that most human of impulses, won out. He tore it open slowly, deliberately, as if the speed of revelation could somehow mitigate the impact. The handwriting inside was precise, meticulous, clearly meant to be read, digested, and internalized. The words leapt off the page with a force Harry could not have anticipated. It began innocuously, almost as if it were a personal note of reassurance, reminders of family ties, duties, and expectations. But then, the tone shifted. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, and then it struck, like a hammer to the chest. The letter confirmed suspicions Harry had long buried, but in the cruelest possible way. It was not a leak, nor a media ploy. This was internal, direct, intended to hurt, but cloaked in the guise of concern. Every line seemed designed to force him to confront a truth he had always feared, that the foundations of his family, of his identity, were not what they seemed. Names, dates, private correspondences, all meticulously detailed. Every word was a reminder of the delicate web of deception that had been spun around him since childhood. And then he reached the final paragraph. The paragraph that changed everything. The paragraph that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It was not subtle. It was a declaration. A confession. Charles, through this letter, had instructed that certain truths be revealed, but only in a controlled, calculated way. And the most explosive revelation was to be delivered by Princess and herself. She was to tell Harry, face to face, that he was not the biological son of Charles, and that the man who had shaped public perception for decades, James Hewitt, was his true father. Harry reread the words 3, 4, 5 times, each reading leaving him more unmoored. The precision of the timing, the cold calculation of its delivery, the knowledge that this revelation had been planned for years, it all compounded the emotional impact. Every feeling he had tried to suppress, anger, grief, betrayal, surfaced in full force. It wasn't just the content of the letter that was devastating. It was the implication. His entire life, his identity, the trust he had placed in his father, had been a carefully constructed illusion. Every privilege, every expectation, every judgment had been influenced by this hidden truth. And now, he was expected to process it, reconcile it, and continue to function as if nothing had changed. But Harry was not willing to accept that. He felt the stirrings of something he had never felt before, a mix of defiance, desperation, and raw, unfiltered rage. How could he continue to live in a world that had been built on lies? How could he face the public, the family, the media, when the very core of his identity had been called into question? Every memory, every relationship, every milestone was now filtered through the lens of betrayal. He called a trusted aide, a confidant who had stood by him through previous scandals and crises. They met in the dim light of a private room, away from the ever-watchful eyes of the press and palace staff. Harry read the letter aloud, each word slicing through the room like a knife. His voice was steady, but beneath it, the tremor of emotional devastation was undeniable. The aide, experienced and composed, could do little more than offer silent support. There were no words to soften the blow. The conversation that followed was a mixture of strategy and raw emotion. Harry's mind raced. Should he confront and immediately? Should he demand answers from Charles? Or should he hold this knowledge close, use it as leverage, and decide the? What makes this situation even more compelling is the alleged authenticity of the photographs. Maxwell, convicted of crimes related to Epstein's activities, is a polarizing figure. Her credibility is simultaneously undermined by her past and amplified by her access. Skeptics question whether the images were manipulated, edited, or taken out of context. Supporters insist that her proximity to the events in question grants her a unique vantage point. And for Meghan Markle, this duality presents a dilemma: how to respond when the credibility of the source is as contentious as the content itself. Consider the public reaction. Social media would be ablaze. Hashtags would trend. Commentators and influencers would dissect every pixel, analyze every angle, and speculate endlessly. The court of public opinion often moves faster than legal or factual verification. A single photograph